Hello and welcome to the Linking Administrative Data with Survey Data Virtual Data Training. My name is Amber Amin Ra, and I am the Research Connections Project Data Manager at ICPSR on the campus of University of Michigan and your host for this training. Please remember to mute yourselves during each of the sessions until your instructor opens the floor for questions. We do welcome your questions throughout the session, so feel free to post your questions in the chat box on the right hand of your screen. Instructors will keep an eye out for questions and answer them when time permits. You can also use the chat box to communicate any technical issues you may be having, or you can email myself or Bianca at any time. Child Care and Early Education Research Connections is a partnership operated by the National Center for Children in Poverty at Columbia University and the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research at the University of Michigan. In cooperation and supported by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation within the Administration for Children and Families in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The key activities of the Research Connections are an interactive website, research database, archive of data sets, detailed metadata, technical assistance, and training and collaboration and outreach. The website is Research Connections' main public face. Through the website, researchers, policymakers, and other users can explore data and resources, learn about child care and early education research, and discover the training and collaborative opportunities presented by Research Connections. Under the main picture, you will see highlights from our library, featured content and announcements of upcoming trainings and events, news and data releases, and ways to connect with other researchers, policymakers, and funders. Also, at the top and bottom of every page, there are buttons and links that will allow you to contact us and to join our email list. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and view our YouTube page. At the very top is the search bar. The search bar is one of the quickest ways to access resources and data on the Research Connections site. Click search next to the magnifying glass and the search bar will appear. If you click go, you will be taken to browse the collection. Here you'll see the Resources tab. Research Connections puts a great deal of effort into cataloging the most up-to-date reports and research articles. There are over 30,000 resources cataloged in this database. Among these are reports and articles, briefs and summaries, questionnaires, and many other types of research-related resources. Our search for NSECE returned over 300 resources. Users can limit their results using the various filters on the left of the screen. Some of the results are tagged as having full text resources. Our search for, by clicking on the data tab, you will be taken to data sets related to the search term NSECE. Overall, there are 343 data sets in the archive of data sets. NSECE has one data set. Similar to the resources results, you can limit what you are looking for by using the filters on the left. Clicking on one of the data sets leads us to the study homepage. The study homepage includes an at-a-glance project description that gives a lot of detailed information about the study, such as the principal investigator, alternate title, summary, official citation, data types, modes of collection, versions, and weights. On the right, we have the number of downloads and notes. These notes can indicate whether there are data that are free to the public or they have some type of restriction to protect participant confidentiality. In this example, at least one of the files is restricted and users are directed to consult the restriction notes and the data use agreement. The Data and Documentation tab is another great place to learn more about the study. We always encourage users to read the user's guide and or code book associated with the data set to learn more about the sampling and analysis of the study. Public use files will be available for download directly from this tab. If you click the download next to the file, you'll see what formats the files are available in. For example, SAS, Data, R, SPSS are pretty standard, but they do vary based on the study. By clicking on the Variables tab, users can see variables and question text in this data set. By clicking on the Related Resources tab, the user will see resources associated with the study. This is one of the ways the various parts of Research Connections website connects with each other. Users can access resources such as reports and papers related to this particular data set, including other publications based on findings from these data sets. I want to talk a little bit about accessing restricted data. There are a few files in the NSECE study that are restricted use, and that is to protect the privacy of the study respondents. You'll see them near the bottom of this slide. If you click download, you will still be able to download a copy of the codebook and disclosure guidelines. You'll have to access the restricted data button in order to apply for restricted data access. NSECE restricted data files have two ways you can receive the data through ICPSR, secure dissemination or virtual data enclave. More information about both of these methods will be given to you once you begin your application. If you already know which method to choose or think you know, click on your selection at the bottom. Otherwise, you can contact us by clicking the ICPSR user support link, and we can discuss which method works best. For this particular one, I know that there's data sets that you have to apply for through NORT, and Rupa Datta can tell you more about that during her presentation. And that includes my introduction to the Research Connections website and the ways to access NSECE data through ICPSR. Feel free to reach out to me at ICPSR. My email is ambyrb@umich.edu. I'd like to introduce our first instructor, Rupa Datta. She will be giving you the workshop overview, introduce types of data, and give you an introduction to NSECE data. I will stop sharing my screen.
Great. Oh, you can even see the clock in Chicago. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to our virtual data workshop. We are really excited to have you here. I am going to share some slides. Our plan for today is, as Amber said, to introduce not only the workshop team, but also have a chance for us to meet all of you, the participants. I'll go a little bit over just the general plan of the whole workshop, all the sessions, and how it all fits together. Talk a little bit about what we actually mean when we say administrative data. The workshop is about linking administrative data to survey data, but we are using the National Survey of Early Care and Education as the example survey data set. It has a lot of nice features that facilitate this kind of discussion. We'll spend a little bit of time just introducing enough of the NSECE so that you're familiar with the lingo and the different components of the study, which we will be evoking throughout the workshop. We'll talk about some examples of linkages that have been done to talk about some of the interesting features of linkages, and then we'll be done with our first 90 minutes. So that's kind of the map. We will have plenty of time, hopefully, to answer questions and have some discussion along the way. So let's get started with introductions. I'm going to start with the workshop team at NYC who are sitting with me in this room, and we're going to try to get everyone's face in front of the screen without making you guys busy. And for our team, I'm going to ask everyone to tell you their name, their experience with administrative data with the NSECE, if there is any, and then any linkages between administrative data and survey data that they bring with them as experience in instructing this workshop. And then for you all, the participants, we'd love to hear, name and affiliation, your research interests in general, and if there's a particular linkage project that you have in mind, that would be great to hear as well. So maybe I'll start with myself. I'm Rupa Datta. I am I work here at NSECE. My administrative data experience, I've worked with a variety of drug treatment evaluation data, arrest records, clinical test records, high school and college transcripts, a lot of childcare related administrative data, licensing records, policy information, subsidy records, as well as other kinds of data like television ratings data, advertising spend, and then human services types of data sources like SNAP, food stamps, TANF, and other human services programs. I am the project director of the National Survey of Early Care and Education, the NSECE. It rolls off of our tongue, where I'm responsible for both the operational aspects and the scientific content of the study, including a lot of analyses. So a lot of my linkage experience is with NSECE data, but with some other evaluations as well as, and also the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. Maybe something. All right, I'm going to turn the computer shares back up, see if we can get your chair.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Seaskin. I am one of the instructors and a statistician at NORC. I've been here for about 2 years. At NORC, I focus on statistical aspects of data collection for surveys and analysis of survey data. I'm also broadly interested in combining data from different sources, survey and non-survey data sources. Before coming to NORC, I earned my PhD at Northwestern, where I served as a Census Bureau dissertation fellow. One of my research projects there focused on using a commercial data source with housing characteristics and assessing whether using that data linked to the American Community Survey could benefit the quality of statistics on housing characteristics. I'm also working on a project at NORC, working with Rupa and with Gabriel, who you'll meet in a second, on building a toolkit to assess data quality of administrative and non-survey data sources, where we're focusing largely on descriptive statistics and data visualization. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gabriel Ugarte. I'm a research methodologist here at NORC. I've been working with the NSECE for about 2 years, mainly doing data and disclosure analysis. I have experience linking the NSECE with other administrative data. Last year, I worked in a project where we linked the NSECE with real estate information from Zillow, and I'm also working in a project where we are linking the data with some subsidy receipt information data. As Zach was saying, I'm also working in other projects where we're using administrative data, and I've also had some experience from my previous work on projects where I worked in the Ministry of Education in Chile. Nice meeting you.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Sarah Hernandez. I am a research director here at NORC. I've been working at NORC for about 8.5 years. I've worked on several projects with the NSECE. I've worked on the 2012 one. My role there was primarily working on the data documentation for the public use and tabulation files. And right now I've been working a lot on the 2019 NSECE to help get that launched off of the ground. So I'm primarily for this workshop assisting with setup and functionality and making sure things go as smoothly as possible for all of you. So very nice to meet you.
Carolina? Carolina there?
senior research.
Elena, I don't know if you're muted.
Oh.
Or just
Oh, maybe I need to download my mic. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So sorry about that. So I am Carolina Milesi. I am a senior research scientist at NORC. I have worked in the NSECE survey for about 6 years, and most of my experience with administrative data has been supporting research teams who want to use the very, very restricted NSECE data files, which we call level 2 data files, and link them with other data sets such as state policies or any other data files. And I think Bethany Edwards is one of the level 2 users. So we have been in touch a lot. I mostly support teams in kind of the application and formulation of the research projects and all the disclosure review that goes on at the end to make sure that we protect the confidentiality of the NSECE respondents. And I will also be one of the instructors in this class. So very nice to have you here.
Great. Bianca, Amber, anyone from ICPSR?
Hi, yes, I'm Amber, and I am the project data manager here at ICPSR. Bianca is the project assistant. A lot of you have talked to her to handle any of your technical difficulties. We're always here if you need to email us. All of our information is available on the website.
Hi, yep, I'm Bianca. I've been your email buddy for the past few weeks. So thank you for bearing with me. And I am, as Amber said, a project assistant on Research Connections. I also work with Data Lumos, which is a government data repository here at ICPSR. And I've worked also with our Civic Leads projects.
Great. Is there anyone else in another that you wanted to introduce? Okay. Great. I'm going to try to call on people, and Bianca, you'll help me if I run out of steam here. So Marina, you're leftmost on my screen. If you'll introduce yourself.
I'm Marina Mendoza. I am the Director of Enrollment and Evaluation at the Denver Preschool Program. The Denver Preschool Program is a program that is funded through city tax dollars to provide tuition credits to every 4-year-old in Denver. My position, I hold all the enrollment data that we have, but also the evaluation projects looking at long-term outcomes of our programs and also our operations. And I'm hoping, I've never used the NSECE data, but I'm hoping to see ways that I can use it, but also look to see how we can use some of our evaluation, our survey data, and link it to other administrative data sets.
Madeline? I think we need you to unmute.
I was trying her spacebar trick, but I guess I did not get it to work. Hi there. Yeah, so I'm Madeline DeBloy. I'm at the University of Arizona. I'm a research scientist here. I work with a 5-person group called the Community Research Evaluation and Development Team. We sit in the Family Studies Department, but we're all contract and grant funded, and so we do a really wide variety of interesting stuff. Recently, we've been working on several projects related to early care and education. One looking at childcare deserts in Arizona, so areas where the number of children far outpaces the number of available slots. And then we're also working with the Women's Foundation of Southern Arizona around some work on 2-generation programs, so things that would support parents getting additional training while also supporting them in raising young children. So for this, I'm interested in exploring what kinds of things could be linked and we could use. We work closely with First Things First, which is the state's early childhood organization, and they have a quality first rating system. So I'm thinking about, looking at the indicators that come out of the survey on what we would expect to be high quality, and then linking that to how many of those programs have actually achieved a high quality rating through the quality first system, and then using disparities in that to maybe figure out what some barriers to entry might be if there's patterns on who is not attaining a high quality ranking.
Great. Bethany?
Hi, Bethany Edwards. I work for the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment at UC Berkeley. Before this, I was a QRS administrator in California, and so obviously worked with a lot of the admin data coming from the QRS. And then in my current role, I'm very intimately familiar with the NSECE. As Carolina mentioned, we are one of the fortunate organizations that works with the L2 restricted state level data. And so I'm actually at a conference where I presented some of our NSECE data this morning, so that was cool. But I'm always interested in expanding what we can do with the NSECE because it is such a really great resource.
Great, thank you. Bianca, I might need your help. I think there's some other people, but I can't see them.
Sure. So.
Yeah.
Yep. Ting Ting.
Oh, hi. Can you see me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hi. I guess good afternoon, everybody. It's good morning here in Hawaii. So I'm actually a fresh PhD, and this is my first time hearing about the NSECE data, and I'm interested in getting to know more about this data source because my experience with the large-scale data is primarily with the early childhood longitudinal data, which I used for my dissertation study because we have recently had a huge policy push here in terms of the early education, so early childhood education. So because Hawaii is a multilingual state comprising a large proportion of immigrants from Micronesian and Pacific Islands, so I'm really interested in this population in terms of their early child care services. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ting Ting. And then we also have Niall. You have to unmute your mic first.
Hello. I'm Niall. I'm a research associate at Cultivate Learning at the University of Washington. It's sort of a think tank at the College of Education here at the university, and I'm working on this project called Partnership for Pre-K Improvement that's financed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And broadly, our goal is to actually like a twofold assignment. One of them is to be a research practice partner for the state of Washington, and the other one is to do case studies on Washington, Oregon, and Tennessee in terms of the implementation of the Gates strategy for implementation of high quality pre-K. And in terms of the data applications I'm interested in is I'm interested in the interplay between professional development, retention, and compensation of the pre-K staff, but I'm also in charge of finance, so I'd be interested in the overall cost of pre-K programs, possible components of the cost of pre-K programs, and also sources of finance, revenue sources of pre-K programs, and so possible linkages with the CCDF data, maybe TANF data, and things like that. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think we have a few people who are calling in or just using our chat function. So if you haven't enabled your mic or video, feel free to make an introduction via the chat function. Donna, I think, are you joining us? Okay, great.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Look, I don't have a webcam on my desktop computer at home, and I'm in Australia, and it's 6:30 a.m. or so, and so I'm not at work to have a webcam, so sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm a education design team leader on the longitudinal study of Australian children, and I've done some profiles of the Australian early childhood workforce. I do have some links with people in the US around early childhood education as well, and I was, for the purpose of learning, the what's being offered here, which I think is fantastic, and I know about this survey because I've used its questions in the design work I've done with the Australian study. So I was just wanting to look perhaps at organisational investments in staff, professional development, and see if I could do some sort of comparison between the Australian data and the US data. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Donna. Is there anybody else who hasn't made an introduction or wants to introduce themselves via chat?
Hi, this is Kevin. Can you guys hear me okay?
Hey, Kevin.
Hi, I'm a researcher at the Department of Youth, Children, and Families in Washington State. And we are Children, Youth, and Families, sorry, we just changed our name. We are involved in, at the state level in looking at these questions of access and supply and demand in childcare. And while administrative data gives us a partial picture of what this looks like, we now have these nagging questions that are probably easiest to explore through linking to survey data. And so that is kind of what has led me here. And I hope to learn a lot about how to make that happen.
Okay, great. I think that's everybody, Rupa.
Okay. All right. Well, this is certainly when we picked the meeting times, I do not think we took Australia and Hawaii into consideration. So we appreciate everyone participating, but especially those of you who are undergoing hardship to do so. Okay. Well, let's get started with our work. It's really so exciting. I spend most of my days creating data, collecting data, curating data, and hoping that researchers will come and use it for important purposes. And it's so exciting to hear all of the ideas that you all have and how you're using not just obviously the NSECE, but any data source. This is really the kind of conversation that we who design studies for public use really thrive on and get our ideas from, so that we can make sure that we're servicing the research community well. Thank you very much. In terms of introductions, I did want to make sure to acknowledge that the NSECE is funded by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation within the Administration for Children and Families, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and you believe Marina is our Federal Project Officer. The NSECE was really designed by a very broad and deep interdisciplinary team of child psychologists, child development experts, sociologists, economists, of course, statisticians and survey methodologists, child welfare experts, and we hope that as you get to know the data or read other people's work, that you'll see that broad base of disciplinary and topical perspectives well reflected in the kinds of items we ended up choosing and how we went about collecting the data. Okay, let's talk workshop plan. Really, our purpose here, I think the best distillation I could come up with of our workshop objectives is to help your linkage project be successful. As you've all acknowledged, there are huge opportunities for increasing the value of survey data and administrative data by linking the two to one another. But this is still a growing, developing area of research, and so there's still a lot of practical issues, and I feel like a lot of the work that's done has a strong trial and error component to it. And most people who've done linkage work really have a lot of battle scars to show for it. And so our hope with this workshop is really to help you have some frameworks for thinking about what are the great opportunities for pursuing linkages, of administrative and survey data, as well as what are some of the possible obstacles that you're going to encounter, and how can you anticipate and manage those obstacles in a really productive way that is the most supportive of your being able to do successful linkages with maybe fewer battle scars than you might otherwise earn. So that's how we're thinking about it. We're really thinking very much about practicality. We're hoping you'll leave the workshop with some good rules of thumb and some good questions to ask yourself as you think about the work that you're doing, so that whatever research project you might take on in the future, you have some helpful tools for thinking about what will work and what the challenges will be and how you can make lemonade out of it all. So in terms of our workshop, there are three primary components. We have the sessions, and here you are in one of them. We have 6 sessions, each 90 minutes. We've tried to structure the sessions in a way that will reveal what we think are the main components of issues, challenges, opportunities that pretty much any linkage project will have in some dimension or another. So today we're really just kind of trying to set the landscape, just define some terms, make sure that you understand the general context of what we're trying to do. Tomorrow, Zach will talk a little bit about administrative data quality, how to think about that. Also, there are a lot of paperwork requirements, is what I wrote on this slide. You may have legal agreements you need to enter into. There will be data use agreements, institutional review board review. There may be consent requirements from the original respondent. There may be also on the back end disclosure review and lots of restrictions on where you can do your research, like physically, what does the room look like? What does the computer look like? As well as what are you allowed to release and how can you do that? And so that's a big part of the work that you would be doing and that constrains your opportunities. And so we'll be feeding in some of those paper requirements as appropriate throughout the discussion. Thursday, Carolina will talk about the analytic purposes of linkages and how those issues might influence what's most important about any given linkage project. We're really trying to think about, for all of these issues, administrative data quality, the analytic purposes of linkage, what are the questions that you should be asking yourself? What are the implications for your particular analysis of these different characteristics of the data? Another thing we'll be talking about a lot is determining feasibility. How can we help you think through your research project so that you don't spend all that time getting the legal agreements and having your sterile room where you can do your analysis, only to then realize that, oh, this isn't really going to work because of whatever analytic issues, sample size requirements, other obstacles. Next week, Carolina again will begin the week with us talking about units of linkage and analysis and other measurement issues that you might want to think about in specifying your analysis. We'll talk a little bit about linkage quality. How do you think about the results of your survey and administrative data linkage? The good news is that we've developed a lot of methods so that it's not just a straight linkage. We have fuzzy matching methods and other tools to improve the extent to which we're able to link data files. But at the same time, that means that linkage isn't necessarily, matching is not necessarily a binary condition. So how do you think about the linkage that you're able to achieve? How do you measure it? And then how do you understand its impact on your data quality and your analytic findings? Again, we're going to do some paperwork and talk about disclosure requirements. And then we'll wrap up next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow. I'll be back to talk about budgets and schedules for this kind of linkage project. as well as try to look across all of our 6 sessions to think about, all right, what did we learn about trade-offs between different strategies, different linkage opportunities, and how you can go into a linkage project with hopefully maybe plans A, B, and C to make sure that you can get something useful out of the exercise. Another component of the workshop is the office hours, and we have really done our best thinking in terms of what should go into the sessions, but the office hours are the opportunity for you to kind of raise issues, and we think there are probably 2 main ways you would do that. The first is that we really welcome you to present your research idea or any specific questions you might have around the idea that you are particularly interested in developing. And the workshop team, as well as other participants, can be a sounding board for you. As you just heard, this is a pretty amazing group with a lot of expertise that can help each of you think about your ideas. Alternatively, you may just have questions about the topic that was laid out that we don't get to, or a slightly different spin on it, and we encourage you to submit questions in advance that we'll try to address during the office hours. We will have, as you know, there are 2 sessions. There's a morning session and an evening session of workshop participants, and you'll all be sharing the same office hours, so you may get a chance to interact with some other participants who are not part of your regular sessions. You're welcome to call in for as little or as much of the office hours as you want. We'll have them on Thursday this week. What we ask is there's a place on Canvas where you can sign up for a slot within the office hours window if you would either like to present information or if you'd like to submit a question. And if all you want to do is listen, then you're welcome to dial in at the third component of the workshop is a written proposal. We have built the sessions in a way that should walk through a lot of the main issues that you'd want to think about in designing a project. And the proposal, we've put together a framework. It'll look like a lot of other research proposals you may have thought about writing, or applications that you may have completed. As a few people have mentioned, the NSECE does have a highly restricted data opportunity, which we call our level 2 data process. And there is an application for the level 2 data that is very closely resembles the proposal that we've put together for you. In addition, there are less restricted NSECE data files that you can obtain through ICPSR, as Amber had mentioned earlier. We do think that the exercise of putting together your proposal will be an important way for you to kind of process what we talk about in the sessions and actually apply it to something that you care about and know about. And so we really encourage you to prepare that proposal alongside the sessions. If you don't have a specific topic that you feel is suitable to work up, then we are happy to share with you some of our ideas for linkages. And we will be, throughout the session, asking you to share with the other participants some of your reflections as you're drafting these proposal sections. So we hope that you will keep up on that score. All right, well, I think that's the end of my introduction to the workshop. So if there are people who have questions about that piece, sorry, I'm toggling around here. If people have questions about how the workshop is supposed to work, or whether there are particular things we will or will not cover, I'll take a moment to pause here and let you ask those questions and hopefully answer them.
Rupa, we actually did get an introduction from Danielle, who we skipped over. Sorry about that.
Okay, great. Why don't you, are you going to read it to us?
So Danielle's a graduate student at the University of Delaware and has worked on a number of research projects using NSECE data and has used administrative data for the master's thesis. Danielle looks forward to learning how to link survey and administrative data.
Excellent. Any other questions from folks? You can feel free to either write in the chat box or just unmute your phone. This is a small enough group that you should be able to.
I was wondering what sort of statistical software are we going to be using for the examples, or to what extent we're going to cover sort of the statistical software aspect?
We will not be walking together through the specific statistical examples. A lot of the questions that we encourage you to answer in the proposal may call for you to do some statistical work on a data set that you're interested in. And we'll talk about some of the issues that you'll want to deal with, but we've structured it in a way so that we don't have to solve the problem that probably across the 10 of you, there are 7 preferred software choices. So there isn't a single choice, and we're going to try to limit the extent to which, especially during sessions, you need to do any data work, but we expect that you may want to do some of it in preparing the proposal.
Yeah, thanks.
Other questions? Okay. I am just done. All right, so let's see. Types of administrative data. So I should admit right off the bat that we're doing a little bit of misinformation in advertising. We traditionally, the definition of administrative data, of course, had to do with data that were generated in program administration. That's where the word administrative comes from. So these are data, for example, child care subsidy records, student attendance files, income tax filing, even grocery store sales. These are data that were generated in some administrative activity that now are being used for other purposes. More recently, there have been all these other kinds of data sources that people have started to use, like metrics from social media and television ratings and walk scores and Yelp ratings, and some older types of data like state laws or policies or crime statistics. There are a variety of things that are not necessarily program administration data, but are other kinds of data sources that can be linked in different ways. For the purpose of this workshop, we are really just taking the broadest, most comprehensive definition possible, which is that we are thinking about any kind of external data source that can be linked to survey data to enhance the analytic value of those survey data, and especially anything along those lines that would require access to restricted use identifiers. So that there's you have an idea for some other data that in conjunction with survey data would really allow you to tackle research questions that you can't tackle with one or the other data source alone, and that there are some either analytic or confidentiality challenges of making that linkage happen and executing the analysis. And really we're including all sorts of things within that approach. I will pause for a moment to see if anyone has any concerns about that or any reactions to this idea that really anything where we're doing this sort of linkage to enhance the value is going to count as administrative data for our purposes. Anyone want to comment or ask questions? I thought I heard a voice. Okay, I should also say that we probably are taking a little bit of the assumption that people are more familiar with survey data than administrative data, and feel free to correct us along the way if you feel like we're tilting too far in one or another direction, but we are, based on what we know about the participants in this type of workshop in general, we are kind of taking the position that you may know a fair amount about survey data and are new to some of the features of administrative data, which may not be true for everyone.
One participant pointed out that the slides might not be showing.
Oh, well then, let's try to solve that problem. Thank you.
Yep.
For the I'm sorry, let me just get that solved. That better?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm trying to remember if we had anything good. I think that other slides were not, I don't know how long that was the case. The slides are posted on Canvas. We're posting them slightly before the session, so you can also download them if you want. I don't think there was anything that critical on the slides that I didn't actually also say. So, okay, so quick review of the NSECE, just enough so that you can make sense of what we talk about in subsequent. So the NSECE was really designed to meet three primary objectives. One is that there was a need for comprehensive national representative data on the supply of early care and education and of the workforce. We do use the acronym ECE a lot, early care and education. There had not been any national representative data, even of centers, in more than 20 years when the NSECE was conducted. And the NSECE was really the first time to have a national representative sample of, for example, the more informal home-based provider sector, as well as the full spectrum of workers within early care and education. At the same time, there were some excellent household data sources about ECE usage, but two of the particular contributions of the NSECE on the household side had to do with household level dynamics, so that we have multiple young children within the household, and understanding how their needs, as well as parental employment schedules and factors together inform ECE usage for the household, and then also a lot of focus on how households search for the ECE that they use. And then finally, the supply and the demand not only were really important individually, but also there was an understanding that we needed to be able to do supply and demand analysis at a meaningful level. And we know that childcare is very much a locally consumed service. And so there are many different features within the NSECE design that try to really link households and their local ECE availability to understand how parental needs and preferences are matching or not the availability of providers at the local level. We do this with 4 component surveys. We'll talk about the household survey, which is the survey of households with children under age 13. There's a home-based provider survey, which I'll say a little bit more later, but these are individuals regularly providing early care and education, children under age 13 in a home-based setting. There's center-based programs providing ECE to children not yet in kindergarten. And then we have a survey of classroom-assigned staff within those centers, and we often call this the workforce survey. And I'll just say that we now try to talk about this as the 2012 NSECE because We are very excited that there will be a 2019 NSECE, which will replicate the full design of the 2012 study. And so if not in your next research project, perhaps in the next couple of years, you would have both 2012 and 2019 data to work with. It'll be a repeated cross-section design. It's not a longitudinal survey design. Okay, so again, a little bit of more context just to make sure that you can work with the conversation as it proceeds over the next several sessions. There are really two sample sources for the NSECE. On the left side of your screen, hopefully you see an orange rectangle, which is the household sample. So there was a sample frame of all housing units within the U.S. And from that sample frame of housing units, we selected a sample whom we screened to determine whether within that housing unit there was a household that had a child under age 13, and that would be the household survey eligible population. We also screened those households to find out if there was anyone, an adult, who was regularly caring for children under age 13, who was not their own child, and who did not appear on state or national lists of home-based childcare providers. And we call that population the unlisted home-based provider population. It'll make more sense hopefully in a minute. We also, on the right-hand side of your screen, you see there's a blue rectangle, which is the provider sample from administrative lists. We compiled all the state and national lists of early childhood providers that we could find, both center-based and home-based. From that, we created a single list of all known addresses where a provider of early childhood services was located. And from that sample frame, we sampled addresses that housed centers, and we screened them to find out if they were serving any children age 5 and under, not yet in kindergarten. Those centers then became our center-based provider survey sample. And from the completed interviews from those centers, we selected the workforce survey sample of classroom-assigned instructional staff, so teachers, assistants, and aides. From the same blue rectangle, we sampled home-based providers that were known to state and local agents and state and national agencies as providing home-based care, and that group is what we call our listed home-based provider. We use these totally uninformative words, unlisted and listed, because really the lists vary so much from state to state. The only thing that they have in common is that they are lists. There are regulated, registered, licensed, exempt, licensed, many different kinds of lists that different states maintain. So there's quite a variety of what makes a provider listed, but we talk about listed and unlisted providers. But what we really, you'll hear us say, is that we have 4 surveys: the household survey, the workforce survey, the center-based provider survey, and we talk about a single home-based provider survey that has 2 components, the unlisted sample and the listed. And that's some of the nomenclature that you'll hear us use. Just to give you a sense, this table shows you the sample sizes and the inferential populations. So, for example, we had 11,629 households with children under age 13. They represent almost 30 million households in the U.S. in 2012 with children under age 13. Similarly, you see there's a home-based provider, and as I mentioned, there are 4,000 listed providers, and they represent 121,000 listed providers to children under age 13. We also have 2,000 unlisted providers in that home-based provider data file, and they represent 5 million unlisted providers to children under age 13. You see there's some discrepancy between the 4,000 providers representing 121,000 listed providers versus the And then we have center-based and classroom-assigned worker as well. So let's turn now to our first activity. So I can stop talking for a moment.
There's a person with a question.
Oh, yeah.
In the chat.
Okay.
From the household sample, if they screened into unlisted home-based providers, did they also take the household survey?
So the eligibility, that's a great question. The eligibility was determined separately for each of them. So if they had, it was possible to be eligible for either, both, or neither. So if you had a child under age 13, then you're eligible for the household survey. If there is a home-based provider, they're eligible for the home-based provider survey. And if you happen to have both, then the household would be eligible for both the household and the home-based provider survey. And that could happen either because, for example, somebody, a mom has a child care business where she cares for other children and she happens to have a 3-year-old. And in that case, they would be eligible for both. Or you might have the case where grandma lives with the mom and the child, and grandma cares for the grandchild who lives in that same house, maybe for no pay. In that case, again, she's eligible as a home-based provider. This household is eligible because they have a young child, and hopefully they completed both. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to try, we'd like to do a variety of exercises throughout our sessions. We have, we think, a mechanism for people to be able to chat in small groups. We think the exercises are better if you have somebody to chat with. And so, Amber, were you going to help us make this technology work?
Okay, I put some directions in the chat earlier, but I can talk everyone through the process for getting into groups and conferences. So you've already been assigned a group, and if you look on the left-hand side of Canvas, just mute your Blue Jeans session, but don't close it out. And if you look at the global navigation bar, you should see an icon that says groups. If you click on that icon and click on conferences, you'll see session 1 is in progress. You can join that conference. And then Rupa will give you more instructions, but you can stay in that conference and discuss with each other.
And so, Amber, are there 2 separate groups that people are on?
Yeah, so, yep, so there are 5 in one and 4 in the other. And the instructors can go back and forth between the 2.
Okay, we're going to see how this works. So what we're going to ask you to do, I'm about to show you an exercise. I just suggest that you pick somebody who's going to report back to the full group once we are done with the exercise. I'll give you a 5-minute and a 2-minute warning. And the exercises are really about grappling with an issue. It doesn't matter if you don't come up with an answer. If you come up with some questions that are inspired by the exercise, that's fine. Really the point is to dig in a little bit. And so I'm going to actually try to share a different file here. Let's see if I can manage this. I am going to share my Word. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'm trying not to drive you crazy. Let's see. So, as we mentioned, a lot of what's helpful is to be able to tell before you've spent a year of your life trying to get access to data whether something is going to work or not. And so we really encourage people and people who come to our level to seek the restricted use data. We really push them to, why don't you figure out if this is going to work? Take the public use data you have and try to make some sense of it to even pursue this. so we're going to do a little exercise here. So what I want you to know, and what I want you to do, here's this table we were just looking at, and we have a really reasonable question. Let's say you happen to have the Pennsylvania Child Care Subsidy record. You have access to the administrative data for a child care subsidy program, which would be a census of all the kids in Pennsylvania that are supported by this program. So we would like to know about how many children do you expect in the 2012 NSECE household survey data would be supported by child care subsidy. So at the time of the interview, how many were receiving a child care subsidy? And so we're obviously looking for a ballpark estimate here, just to think about, well, based on really no information, how could you come up with an estimate? And so you have the sample sizes here, and then the link at the bottom is actually to some federal data about participation in the Child Care Development Fund program. And we were reminded that, I guess, Chrome doesn't really like to have multiple windows open in BlueJeans. So if you're using Chrome, then if you have another browser, it might be better to use that other browser, or maybe somebody else in your group can open the file and tell you what you want to know. But so that's the question. Like, estimate the number of Pennsylvania children in the 2012 NSECE household data who are receiving child care subsidies. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to get going, and I'll let you know when you have 5 minutes. If you have any questions, please either write in the chat feature or go ahead now. I forgot to give you your selection mechanism, which I was just going to suggest just pick the person with the earliest birth month, earliest in the year, birthday earliest in the year. I'm going to go ahead and give you a 5-minute warning. Sorry, I have children. Let's say it some other way. Okay, you'll just take a minute or so to figure out what you'll share with us. Okay, Amber, is there a group 1 and a group 2, or a red team and a blue team or something? Is there some way to distinguish?
It's group 1 and group 2.
Okay, great. Group 1, is there somebody who can tell us a little bit about how you thought about this question? Was there a January birthday in the group? Donna?
It's Donna here. I'm in group 1. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I couldn't get the sound going on the other thing, but I did find an answer very quickly. Is anyone else in the group in group 1 there?
Yeah, I was in group 1, but we didn't get a chance to discuss. I think there's some technical issues.
Okay, well, why don't we go ahead if Donna or Bethany, if somebody wants to say, Donna, you said you had come up with an answer? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just quickly, and I really wasn't familiar with the terminology, but I think it was 146,959. Is that right?
How did you come to that estimate?
Well, I was looking for, children in receipt. I just look for the data things saying children in receipt of childcare subsidies, and then it comes up in state areas, and so I just went down to Pennsylvania and found that. But I don't know whether I was on the right table, but it was my first quickest effort.
Okay, great. So that gets us to the number of actual Pennsylvania children who are receiving the child care subsidies, and they'll all be available in the administrative data. And so we linked those administrative records to the survey data, which are not a census. Then what we're trying to figure out is, well, how many survey cases might we have from that represent those 146,000 children in Pennsylvania. So I don't know if anyone in group 2 sort of took a next step or a similar approach to figuring out this.
It's table 2, by the way. Yeah.
So it looks like our groups maybe need a little bit more work. Was there anyone else who took another step on this exercise? Bethany, did you have an estimate?
No, sorry.
So what's the way that we could be going about doing this? So here's a rule of thumb. I can't see everyone. If I call in more, I'll figure out how to be able to tell who's avoiding. Marina is not avoiding. Marina, did you have any thoughts about how we would go about making this estimate? Are you muted?
Sorry, was that me or?
Yeah.
Oh. I did not. I was still orienting myself, but I think Madeline had some in our group chat if she wants to sort of discuss.
Madeline? We can't hear you. Madeline, are you talking?
Oh, sorry, I had unmuted myself, but I had turned off. That explains why you didn't hear anything that I just said. Yeah, sorry, I had been talking a lot about what was not happening in group 2. Yeah, so I had pulled up the same table, except or the same link, obviously, but I was looking at table 1 of the monthly estimates, and I was just trying to get some clarification on table 1 versus table 2, and making sure that we were getting the best estimate from that link of what the subsidies were, and then we'd need to figure out what proportion of the NSECE sample was from Pennsylvania, but I did not know where that lived, and sort of crosswalk the relative proportions of kids, and I think also that the total number of kids in Pennsylvania, maybe also. So I had a lot of thoughts, but yes, I did not see any action in in the conference page, nor did I work fast enough to get there on my own.
Fair enough. So as you will discover, you mentioned a number of things that one could want to know reasonably, most of which will not be available to you when you do this kind of work. So the kind of back of the envelope calculation we'd encourage you to do, and I'm going to go back to my Word here. So just roughly speaking, you might find that there are about 1.4 million subsidized children, and here you see that there were about 50 million children under 13 in 2012. You can see that in the first row of this table. So 1.4 out of 50 million is not quite 3, is slightly over 3% of all children were subsidized in 2012. As I said, they totally back of the envelope, but just to get you thinking about this. So about 3% we might expect of the 21,665 children would be subsidized. So of the data in the data, we have 21,665 children. That's a pretty good size number of children for a sample survey. And we'd expect 3% of them or so to be subsidized. Okay, so that brings you to something on the order of 650 children. So we would expect there to be about 650 children on child care subsidies out of the 21,665 that are in the data. Then, as you pointed out, Madeline, well, we want to know how many of them live in Pennsylvania. And so you could, look up the Census Bureau website or Wikipedia or guess, and it looks like about 4% of the U.S. population lives in Pennsylvania. And so we might guess that of the 650 or so subsidized children that we would have in the data, about 4% of them would be in the state of Pennsylvania. And so what that means is that although Pennsylvania is a large state and there are 21,000 children in the NSECE, you might expect about 26 of them to be subsidized children to be living in Pennsylvania. So why is it worth it to do this exercise? Because that would be a totally reasonable thing for you to want to do. If you had the Pennsylvania child care subsidy records, you could link them to the NSECE household survey data, and we actually have consent from households to link their individual records to administrative data, which is very rare for surveys, but we have it. And so you could link those households, you could find the ones in Pennsylvania, and you could have a great research project in mind. But as a back of the envelope calculation, you might expect 26 of your children to be linking to the Pennsylvania record. So you're going to want to think about what kind of analysis you're going to do. 650 children altogether in Pennsylvania doesn't sound like a bad sample size. But 26 subsidized children means that you probably don't want to just analyze the subsidized children in Pennsylvania, right? You may want to think about a different kind of design or question. All right, so that's just the kind of thing we want to encourage you to do. There's a lot that you can do, back of the envelope, just, you know, Googling random facts. They don't even have to be accurate. Like, so, you know, is it actually 26? Could it be 18 or 60? Yes, of course, this is a very approximate estimate. But chances are it's not 300, right? And that's the kind of rough calculation that we would really encourage you to think about before you do your work. And we frequently get people who request data and haven't really thought through, like, oh yeah, I could go through all this pain and maybe it won't really get me there. Any questions about the methodology or why I think this is useful to spend time on?
I have two questions, Rupa. One, just so looking at the table, one, I think that's where you got the 1.5 million from, and that was the monthly estimate. And then table two, what someone else had looked at has 2.5 million as the national estimate. And that doesn't say anything about monthly. So just like, if we're gonna do these back of the envelope calculations, like, do you have a preference on where we start to try to get the best estimate of number of subsidized children?
Well, and so I think, let me see if I can open this file and see if we can share it. I don't know if that'll work or not. Going off of my recollection, what I believe you have is in table 1. I don't know, let me see now. Let me see if I can share my browser.
And then while you're pulling that up, the other question was just, this sample did try to oversample low-income populations, right?
Correct, and there is almost a 40% bump up there, so it would be maybe closer to 40 than 26. You're absolutely right. And so just to answer your first question, Madeline, so the table 1, I believe, is the average monthly number of children served. Mm-hmm. And table 2, I think, is actually an annual number. And right. The average spell is about 4.5 months or something. And so you do get almost double as many children served over the course of a year as at any one point. And so part of what Carolina will be talking to you about on session 3, I think, is exactly that kind of trade-off. Like, well, if you want only those families that are receiving the subsidy at the time of the interview, then you're going to have a smaller set of households, but you have richer data about them. You could go to the annual receipt, how many people received subsidies ever in those prior 12 months, and you might double your sample size, but now the data that you have is going to be a little different because some people are talking about my childcare today, but you're treating me as somebody who's received subsidy in the prior year. And that's a classic example of the kind of trade-off. I mean, we have to make that in any kind of analysis, but it happens a lot in these linkage projects, I think. So you're going to think about what is the trade-off between a more precise measure with a narrower sample size versus a broader measure where I get more sample, but maybe the measures aren't as precise or informative. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Great, thank you. We have 10 minutes left, so I'm not going to ask any other, invite other questions unless somebody says. Let's see if I can figure out how to share my PowerPoint screen again. And so we wanted to talk about a couple of example linkages. So one thing that we've done in Illinois is actually linked the NSECE household survey data to the Illinois, it's called CCAP in Illinois, but exactly the kind of analysis I was just talking about. We linked households to household level survey data. So the exercise we just did was about children. Another choice is, are you going at the child level or at the household level? We went at the household level, and we did two different things. One was to characterize low-income families that were and were not receiving child care subsidies and try to see how they differ on demographic characteristics, employment patterns, things like that. And then the other was that we did a validation exercise. To what extent do the survey-based measures of who we think are receiving subsidies match with what the administrative data say? A different project was to look at Zillow. Zillow.com is a website that you may be familiar with that has a lot of data on property values, especially for owned residences. And so we tried to do two things here. We tried to link the household survey data to the property values for those addresses. And we also tried to do the same thing for the home-based provider survey to understand, to what extent are home values determinants of either center-based ECUs by household, or is provision of home-based ECE predicted by home values, especially among households with similar incomes. So we know that income does have a relationship both to center-based ECE use as well as a negative relationship to providing home-based care. But what if we were controlling for income and then introduced home values as well as another variable? And we'll talk a little bit about the kinds of work we did in those. So other kinds of data, the NSECE public use files already include linkage to American Community Survey data. We've used the actual census tract to link in a whole bunch of other information about the population. You can link policies at the geographic level. We have data available that you can do price adjustments to take into account local cost of living. People have used quality ratings, immigration information, licensing lists, workforce registries, all sorts of different kinds of data sources with the NSECE. I'm talking a little fast and rushing a little bit. So here's a second exercise, and we won't try the groups right now. That didn't seem to work so well the first time. But just to think about workforce registries, right? So some states maintain databases of the ECE workers in that state and their demographic characteristics, their qualifications, maybe the professional development they're receiving, and the provider where they are employed. And if it's a home-based provider, then it would be their own residence. So thinking about the NSECE design, I'd like you to think about how could we link workforce registry data, assuming we have the permission. So you have a data file about, oh, so this is Mary, and she is 50, and she's Hispanic, and she has a DA, and she works in this Head Start program. And we have a data file like that, and then we have all of the NSECE data. What are some linkages that we could think about, and what could you learn from them? So I'm going to flip back to the picture of the different surveys just to give you a thought. And so who has some thoughts about what might be a great idea for linking workforce survey data to workforce registry data to NSECE data, or what's a totally wacky one because it's almost 5 o'clock and we're feeling wacky? Anyone have a thought about a potential linkage? between the workforce registry data and one of these NSECE data sources?
Well, it's Donna here again. Sorry to keep talking, but well, this is sort of what I'm interested in. So, you know, potential, because I've got the Australian data, and if I wanted to link it to this US data, then to get more information, then potentially I might take a workforce registry, if for California, for example, or another state rather than the whole, well, whatever state's available, and then try and link and get the profile of the providers. Would that work? Is that
So
possible?
you're basically thinking of whatever, if we have 25 variables in the workforce survey data, maybe adding the registry would give us 25 more variables that we could use to understand.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Who has an idea for one of the other data sources? How else could we link workforce registry data to some other source to answer some questions?
I was wondering to what extent it's feasible. So, for example, if there's some child outcome data that's available in my workplace, and I wanted to link it with the center-based provider survey, is that feasible? I guess that would be by the address, or is that feasible? Not at all, or what do you think would be like the linkage variable between them?
Right, so that's a good question, right? So you have, there are children in the survey, and you could be thinking about linking the child outcomes to individual children, although there might not be that many children. Or depending on what data you have, it sounded like you just suggested take the child outcome data for a particular geographic unit, like a census tract or a county or something like that, and link that to the local centers. Or maybe, how else are you thinking about that?
Well, you mentioned earlier that families are giving consent for linkage with CCDF data, so it sounded like it would be possible to link at like the very lowest, like child level. So if I had child level data and I know what sort of programs they go, and then let's say I wanted to link it to the workforce survey, and I wanted to see like if a provider is receiving professional development, and if that's correlated with the children making like improvement in their math skills or whatever. Is that feasible or?
Great. Is that feasible? We're gonna let you figure out, and we'll explore over the coming sessions. But that's definitely an idea worth thinking through and seeing what might be feasible about it. Anyone have another proposal for linking? We have 3 minutes. I will mention that another thing we've been hearing a lot about lately is, for example, the extent to which the workforce resembles the children in a community. So what's the likelihood that an Hispanic child could have an Hispanic preschool teacher? And does that vary across different parts of the country? Is it similar or different for African American children versus Hispanic children? And so in that case, you could think about, for example, creating geographic aggregates, whether at the county level or some other geographic unit, of the workers who are reported to work in that community, and finds that whatever 17% of workers in this county are Hispanic, and then you could connect that to the children, either in the household survey or in a broader demographic survey like census data or something, to say what is the likelihood that children in a particular type of place would have preschool teachers who would match their demographic, something like that. Okay. Well, we got to a little bit more of the material today, this session, than we did in the earlier session. So we are pretty much out of time. Tomorrow Zach will talk with us about data quality and administrative data files and what implications that might have for your linkage analysis. We encourage you to take a look at our draft proposal, which is posted on Canvas, to think about those first early stages of the written proposal and what we talked about today. If you're interested in signing up for office hours, please do that. And we would love to hear from you about how this works for you today. Is there any requests you have for the coming sessions that would make it work better for you and more informative or entertaining or whatever. Okay, so I think that's our plan. Bianca or Amber, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Yes, in the announcements section, there's a quick 5-question survey evaluation for today's session. Also, when you get into the conferences, there's a big chat section on the right. So even if you don't use audio, you can chat with one another during the breakout session.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for joining, everyone. We're really excited to have you, and we will see you tomorrow.